It's Sandeep Gill here from AFTO, the Quality and Knowledge Translation Manager, and I have my colleague here, Bryn from AFTO as well, joining us. Today we have a webinar on cybersecurity and breach clinic update for 2021, and we have Saegis here to present for us. From Saegis and Valencia, we have Leanne, who is the Director of Practice Management from Saegis, and we have Aaron, who is the Managing Director of Cybersecurity from Valencia. And they will be going over the presentation today. It is a jam-packed hour, so I will say if there's any comments, please put them into the chat. And if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A. The slide deck and the recording will be shared in a few business days after the webinar today. And with that, I think I have all the housekeeping down, so I'll hand it over to Leanne.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sandeep. It's really great to be here. It's a perfect time to continue this conversation from our last engagement with you guys at the conference last year. So I'm actually going to turn off my video. I'm just going to save my bandwidth. And as Sandeep indicated, please feel free to jump in with questions by putting them in the chat at any time. We'd like this to be as engaging as possible. So technology, it's really revolutionized the delivery of healthcare, and the benefits are really quite profound. And just to give you some practice on the chat, if each of you could just put one benefit of technology that you appreciate as a healthcare worker, that would be great. I'll continue talking. At this time, I think if all of us were asked the question, would any of us want to step back in time to a paper-only system? And that would include patients, I think it would be a resounding no. And for me, even the last year, I've journeyed a little bit as a patient. I had access to my lab work and my hospital reports, sometimes even before my physician did. It's really quite brilliant, and the benefits are so significant. With advancement also comes risk. And as healthcare professionals, we're all very familiar with that concept. Medications have benefits and introduce some potential side effects. Surgical advancements save lives and can introduce complications every time we get on that OR table. Technology is no different. Benefits versus risk. It's a trade-off, and we all know that well in healthcare. Today, Aaron is joining me. We've worked with Aaron and his team at Valencia for several years, and they really know cyber. And we're really excited that you'll have an opportunity to engage with him to benefit from his knowledge, specifically in the healthcare space. He's done a lot around audits, risk assessment, program design, and has been involved in some exciting projects like working against the hacker group called Anonymous and the security certification of Canada's classified network. So he's a great resource to have with us here today. So in terms of our objectives, we've got a few, and it's going to be a packed hour. We want to discuss the current cybersecurity trends in healthcare. We want to take a look at the top threats facing your team and best practices to help you reduce your risk, both as a team and as an individual. We want to explore what a cyber attack looks like and what to do, describe how and where to report breaches, and then some questions that you will have to be able to ask an IT consultant, somebody you're engaging around the IT conversation, and your network team as well. The goal here is really to get you excited about this topic and not see it as a burden. You know, as we dive in today, I want to give you some consideration on two situations that have recently happened, and maybe you've heard about them in the news. One was a few weeks ago, a cyber attack in a community in Florida, where a cyber criminal accessed using remote access software the controls of a water plant, and they increased the lye, otherwise known as sodium hydroxide, 100 times. That concentration would have caused serious effects. Now, fortunately, a very alert team member saw the little mouse cursor moving along with nobody at the desk and was able to intercede. I raise this because it's certainly not just a healthcare conversation, it's across all of our infrastructures. And that affects each of us every day. We need to really understand that this is a new reality. This is not going away. In fact, it's just going to become a new normal. So getting up to speed, being aware, and helping our teams develop a secure aptitude and a secure culture is really where we all have to be. So we're really excited to help move in that direction. And the second situation is some knowledge that came out of Israel not that long ago. And that's about the fact that there is there is ability for hackers to go into digital technology like an MRI scan, for example, and modify the data that's on that test result and do it in a way that's very difficult to know that something has changed. They demonstrated things like modifying the presence of a tumor or adding a tumor that's really not there. Now, as healthcare professionals, could we ever fathom that sort of disruption? Like, how could a human being even think like that? But we have to sort of understand the breadth and the lack of limits that criminals have to acquire money and power. So I want to have that as part of your lens as we go through today. And I'm really hoping at the end of this discussion, we'll call it, hopefully there's lots of time for discussion, that you're excited about your role that you'll play in being an alert member of the team that has the cyber responsibility and the security responsibility as part of what your obligations are. So what is the situation currently in Canada? It was really interesting. We literally called the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity this morning. The data is telling and also not complete. 48% of Canadian cybersecurity breaches in 2019, they were in the healthcare industry. The last 2 months of 2020, attacks on healthcare increased 45%. That's more than double the increase in cyber attacks across all industries worldwide. Now, Canada, this might be shocking, saw the biggest increase with a 250% hike in attacks. Considering that the vast majority of breaches in healthcare go unreported, and you'll start to get a picture of the situation that we find ourselves in. So why is healthcare such a lucrative target? Well, we do have, amongst all of our infrastructure, some fairly disjointed legacy systems. We're working to improve that. There's a lot of evolution going on, but the reality is still there, that we have a lot of patchwork to connect the old systems to what's coming up and down the pipeline now. We have competing high-level priorities. I don't have to explain what that means to anybody in this audience today. We have staff that are largely untrained on cybersecurity best practices, and that's understandable as well. This is a relatively new conversation for healthcare, so it's something that we need to address. We're also motivated. Sorry, Aaron?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on this, if I may. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Leanne.
No,
I'll do it again
Aaron.
later.
Excellent.
I'll interrupt you more later. But you're on such an important theme. I was listening carefully as you talked about the fact that the alerts are increasing and seeing some agitation in my own mind as you talked about this. We see it from the coalface. You know, we get the calls from a clinic, a hospital, or outside of healthcare, public sector organizations that are dealing with ransomware breaches or more sophisticated attacks. Healthcare targeting, everything you said is true. You've got technology debt. We have older systems. They're targeted not only because the value of the PHI is high, but we're also seeing nation states and organized crimes that are building their own data lakes, their own repositories of information that they use to create profiles downstream. So in the United States, for example, a couple of years ago, we saw one of the largest ever attacks against Anthem, a private health insurer. And the intent was for, in this case, it was attributed to China, collection of information that could be used for identity theft more broadly. These are making healthcare orgs really targeted. And the fact is that healthcare is doubly exposed. We have more legacy technology and we move more slowly into the cloud in healthcare than in other sectors. That actually creates some security friction for us. And the data itself is so highly valuable. So those statistics were very sobering when we saw how the majority of sector attacks are focusing on healthcare and that's increasing. It struck us that this is a domain that's not going to change. 2021, we will see more targeted attacks in healthcare organizations and more sophisticated attacks.
Wow, that's excellent. And of course, we're an industry that's motivated to recover, aren't we? You know, we've got patients waiting in line for care, and stopping that process, as you might be able to do in a bank without too much safety issues. We don't really have that luxury. And of course, we are publicly funded, and it's a public safety, so it makes the news. It makes a lot of it raises a lot of eyebrows. So that's excellent. In terms of consequences of breaches in healthcare, I'll touch on the first couple of ones here. This is not new as well. If we were to imagine going to work and all of a sudden your computer didn't turn on, what would that feel like in that moment? Not having any access to the digital technology that we need to do almost 100% of our work. So it all becomes a patient safety issue, a breach of privacy, which is also a patient safety issue, but has another level of concern attached to it. Downtime, significant stress, financial and legal consequences, and reputational damage. And Aaron, some of the material that I've been reading recently really speaks to some of this, is why reports aren't done in the healthcare. Do you have something to comment in terms of, you know, the hesitancy to report based on these consequences?
Yeah, actually, I want to speak about the consequence first, really briefly. This consequence of downtime in healthcare is super important. And those of you who are working, many people in clinics who are also working in healthcare or other facilities realize this. But one of the things that strikes me about consequences in healthcare when we're doing risk assessments, for example, in larger clinics or hospitals, is we see how healthcare needs to invest in recovery systems, continuity systems. So if our EMR is down, how do we fail over? Those systems are equally targeted in many cases. So we are exposed, and the consequence of a breach in healthcare means that not only do we have to do better cybersecurity, but we have to do better business continuity planning or disaster recovery planning to understand, what if the system is down, how do we continue operating? This puts an extra burden on organizations. Your question around reporting is a good one, though, and I think we'll cover this in a few different domains. How and when are we obligated to report a breach to the Privacy Commissioner, and under what circumstances do we need to report that breach to other authorities as well? This is a nuanced requirement, and in fact, one of the handouts I know that we've worked on for the Saegis product talks about what your obligations are when you need to report a breach. When we see this in real world scenarios, it's not always cut and dried. A situation where, for example, a clinic maybe had malware installed, but we are not sure whether the attackers exfiltrated data. Do we need to report that or not? There are many cases where you might need to seek a little bit of advice to understand whether this constituted a breach or not. And there's a lot of good resources available for us to do that. I think the core messaging I would give any clinic when it comes to breach reporting is, if you are in doubt, you need to start speaking to the privacy commissioners and to the colleges early. There's good advice out there from the CMPA and even from the privacy commissioner guidance. But the fact of the matter is that breach recording in Ontario is required. And so we need to be conscious of the fact that you may need to bring your breaches up to the college, or if the breach doesn't involve personal health information, you may have a requirement to speak to the privacy commissioner.
Excellent. And one of our objectives was to take a look at what type of threats are facing your team. So I'm going to work the slides, and Aaron's going to just touch on some of these top level threats that we're all seeing in healthcare right now.
Thank you. Leanne, just a logistical question. I don't see the slides on my screen. Are they actually being displayed for the panelists and the members? Yes?
Yes, they are. Sorry, Aaron, I'm not sure why you can't see the slides, but yeah, Leanne's sharing her screen, and
Perfect.
we can see the slide deck.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
Well, that's good. So this first, I'll say the first one and you can comment: denial of service and malware attacks.
Thank you, and I have it open on my side as well. So first threat around denial of service malware. I mean, these are two separate things, but you need to be aware of. Denial of service happens if somebody takes us offline. So in a clinic, there's so many ways that we could be taken offline, but quite often this has to do with your cloud and your internet providers. So what you need to think about in terms of core threats is what happens if your connectivity is dropped. If you are no longer able to connect to your cloud-based EMR, because your ISP, Rogers, Bell, TELUS, whomever you're dealing with, is not online anymore. That's a denial of service attack. We also see targeted denial of service attacks. In 2019, 2020, we saw attacks against public sector organizations that are simply intended to knock a service online or offline. And because we are in the cloud, that becomes a real threat for clinics. Your systems aren't sitting always in a closet behind your reception area. They are in a data center somewhere in Toronto or central Canada. So they can be exposed because you may have one EMR platform in the cloud that's now servicing 50 or 100 clinics. They become targeted because cloud services are more visible and online on the internet. We also see malware attacks as a major threat facing teams. Malware is anything to do with malicious software that gets installed on your devices. This could be as simple as somebody browsing a bad website on Internet Explorer or Chrome on a Windows box, or it could be more sophisticated, somebody actually having their mobile phone get compromised because there was a piece of malware that they clicked on when somebody sent them a false text message. Injecting malware into your system is one of the big targets of attackers, and they use, on your next bullet, Leanne, social engineering and phishing techniques to be able to be successful. Over 90% of security incidents happen because of people, because hackers chose to take the shortcut of bypassing your firewall and your encryption and your password by hacking you, by sending you that sophisticated phishing email offering you the free digital stethoscope or telling you about the invoice from your medical care provider that you did not see. Social engineering is a huge threat. The exposure in Canada and the public sector for social engineering remains really high. Last year, we worked with a number of federal and provincial organizations to try and measure how effective organizations were at protecting themselves against social engineering intended to either commit fraud or data theft. And what we found is that small and large size organizations were often between 30 and 45% clicking on sophisticated social engineering phishes or emails that were sent to people. So threats facing your team, social engineering is probably one of the most important things that you need to be aware of. There are other techniques, credential stuffing. We may have heard about this. The CRA, for example, was attacked last year by hackers who simply found all of our passwords on the internet and then started stuffing those against every username and of Canadians that they could think of. This is a credential stuffing attack. And so sometimes the threats are not direct. Sometimes are the threats that are the fact that an admin or a physician used a password or a similar password on Gmail 3 years ago, and it's only one character removed from the password to the EMR. Credential stuffing attacks can find those types of techniques. So it's really important to be aware of the fact that a lot of our exposure is actually about how we use the systems personally. We're not attacking the gear, we're attacking the people and the way that we engage in it. Those are such core threats to be aware of. Every clinic has susceptibility to this kind of attack. And that's why you'll hear us talk in terms of number one, number two things that you should be doing. But right up at the top is dealing with multi-factor authentication, adding in another layer so that you're not just using a password.
Yeah, and when you think I think it was about 20,000 Canadians that were affected by that credential stuffing. So it just demonstrates that we have habits that don't serve us well where we do reuse those passwords.
You're right. And you know, Leanne, coming back to the implications for healthcare practitioners and clinics for those examples with the 30,000 accounts, you can imagine that this was not the CRA. You could imagine that this was St. Joseph or UHN or pick your large clinic or hospital. And today, actually, there is a class action lawsuit being launched against CRA. Our firm is the expert witness for the Crown on this. And now we're seeing double exposure. There's the loss of the data for those people who are attacked. So in this healthcare example, the health records are gone. And then there's another whammy of the fact that that entity is going to be liable potentially to a class action lawsuit showing that you did not show due diligence because you don't have good safeguards. So all of these types of threats are really in healthcare targeted around how are we getting access to PHI. One other major threat that is human-based is this notion of unauthorized access to PHI. This is complex. This can cover everything from whether an individual outside of the circle of care was looking at records that they should not have seen. But in a cybersecurity sense, what we're talking about here is whether there's insufficient security controls to protect personal health records. So an EMR that is old school and too open that allows everybody to see everything would be an example of where you are more exposed to unauthorized PHI access. In the cybersecurity breach world, what often happens is you may run into a scenario that looks like this. Somebody in your clinic clicked on a link that they shouldn't have and got malware. And so you call your IT provider to come in and try and clean viruses off of the system. At the same time, attackers are going to be exploring that little network on your clinic. And if they are seeing email records or files that are sitting outside of the EMR, they will access that. So I now have another scenario where unauthorized access to PHI can occur. So all of these threats can fit large organizations or small organizations, but they certainly are things that clinics need to be really conscious of.
And I just added the last bullet about unauthorized disclosure. You know, there's been some cases that have made it into Canadian news. And a lot of this comes down to boundaries, you know, to where we have access, where we don't, and to understand the consequences of breaching those boundaries. When some of the data that I was looking at yesterday, Aaron, was about 30%, or just over 30% of breaches are a result of unauthorized access or unauthorized disclosure. So it is a conversation as teams that we really need to have, and be, you know, just have that culture of data security as part of our way of being healthcare professionals.
I like that 30% angle. You know, so much of this talk today is about what we as right-thinking business people, physicians, clinicians need to do to protect ourselves. But as a cybersecurity practice, we talk about insider threat, accidental threat, and deliberate threat. So today there's a lot of focus on what's the deliberate threat, what am I worried about? But accidental disclosure of PHI is a real issue, and insider threats are a real issue as well. And those need to be treated the same way. There are security and privacy controls that you need to ensure are in place. So if you had an issue where there was unauthorized access to PHI and you could not demonstrate that you had appropriate logging in place to find it, or that you had not put in place a need to know principle or access controls, then you have a liability issue. So cybersecurity and privacy are really important when it comes to those insider issues around unauthorized disclosure. Thank you, Leanne, for bringing that point up.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that training becomes so important, because that's an expectation as well in terms of our privacy, meeting privacy obligations as a clinical team, as an organization that is dealing with patient health information. Yeah. So the next slide I'm going to pop over to, Aaron. I'm not sure if you have them up now, but it's the team best practices slide. Maybe you can just touch base on a few of those. Some of them you've already touched base on, but I think it's really good to know what are the key points. And these aren't all of them, but certainly they're the high flyers.
And Aaron,
yeah, I'll speak to this.
Yeah. Sorry, Aaron, I was just going to comment too. There's just a question actually in the chat from one of the participants saying, do you have a breach response plan? So maybe you can comment on whether or not you think teams should be having a breach response plan in place. And for other folks on the line, if you have one already, or if you have any thoughts about it, again, comment in the chat box. We'd love to know what other people have in place currently.
Yeah, it would be interesting to get a sense of how many of you already have a breach response plan and what they look like. The quick answer to the question is you must needs have a breach or an incident response plan in place. Sometimes they can be very simple. Who do you need to inform? How do you escalate? And what are the steps that you need to follow? A checklist with some activities. The larger your environment is, the more sophisticated some of the breach and the incident response plans are. But if you think of what your binder needs to look like, if you are in a clinic and you have found that you are wearing that hat that says, I am the CPO, Chief Privacy Officer or Security Officer, if you have inherited those obligations, your binder must needs include how do you deal with a privacy or security breach. And so that's an important piece of your toolkit. In terms of best practices, look at folks, you can overwhelm yourself with best practices. To me, what I'd like to talk about is what I'd say is what's your curated list? What are the things that we think you need to do first, second, third, fourth in order to be most effectively secure? There is a lot of really good guidance out there online, and I would certainly encourage you, if you wish to do a little bit of research yourself, to look at the guidance that's coming out from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, the privacy commissioners, the colleges of physicians, and you will quickly, as we do, get overwhelmed by trying to reconcile everything that everybody's telling you. So let me distill it to a few simple things that we all say, the top 10s. Number one with a bullet, get your backups done. whether you have an IT provider who handles it for you or whether you're doing it yourselves, get your backups done, get your backups offline as well as online so that they don't get encrypted in the event of a malware breach, and test that you can recover. So if you want a number one control, today's world, we have to kind of take this notion of assume that you have been breached. Assume that it's possible for you to be breached. Where do you go next? So backups become superbly important. If you don't have them in place, you are not going to be able to recover, or you won't even be able to have a conversation about whether you can pay ransom or not because you've got no option, you cannot recover. The second best practice that we're referring to here, and we will send out some PDF files that will communicate these very simple one-pagers, so you don't have to scribble them all down too much. But talk about policies and standards. So cybersecurity and privacy are very much about due diligence. In the event that you have a privacy or security incident, and the college or the privacy commissioners are coming in and saying, well, what did you do? They're going to ask you, did you have policies? Did you communicate to your team and to your staff and to your employees and to your partners what is necessary? So policies and standards that apply to you, your partners, and your providers become really important. Another best practice in clinics, we absolutely need secure mail, secure messaging. Even simple communications, logistical communications between a client, a patient and a physician, you should have a secure solution in place. What we don't want to find in today's clinical environment is personal health information or personal information that's flowing around your systems in an unstructured fashion, like email or in a Word document. We don't want to see any of that. Some other core best practices, ongoing and annual training, both of them. Cybersecurity and privacy awareness training are really important. The only way that you really reduce exposure in our clinics, the only way is by changing behavior. Because as we talked about, greater than 90% of the breaches are happening because somebody decided to go after Sandeep or Cindy or Bryn and say, you know what, I'm going to hack you. So people who are well trained and have a good conscious awareness of cybersecurity and privacy practices are our best defense. Ongoing training means not staring at a PowerPoint deck and I'm done. It means a lot of micro interactions and a lot of conscious simulations. Larger organizations take this to heart. So if I'm in a large hospital or a bank or a formal entity, we will often find that they are doing awareness training, they're doing webinars, they're doing communiques, they're doing simulations, they're doing breach exercises, they're doing tabletop exercises, all the way down to let's pretend that we had a full-on breach. That is what the universe of training looks like. In a clinic, your job is to go out and seek where can you get the best sources to ensure that you and your staff are engaged and understand what's important on your top things. The next bullet down, updating devices. If you do a couple of things after listening to this webinar, obsessively update all of your devices. Mac, PC, Android, don't care. They should always be patched. You should be going in and looking for that software update button for your applications and for your operating system. If I'm going to hack you, it's probably because A, I was able to fool you, and B, your system has a flaw. Patches fix flaws. So patch often, patch regularly. Focus on your IT provider if you're not managing your own systems, and drill them hard. How are you patching? When are you patching? How can you show it to me? And are you patching everything? Everything, my applications and my services.
Aaron, in the past, updates were sort of associated with added features of the apps we're using in the software. And it really, now most of the patches come down to improving security for our devices and our apps.
That's right. We don't patch for functionality anymore, Leanne. I mean, yes, new functions and features come out, but many, many patches are there because they're addressing cybersecurity issues. They're trying to avoid what we call the zero-day vulnerabilities, the vulnerabilities that we can exploit in the wild for systems that are unpatched. So this is a superbly important thing. The next best practice that we're talking about, and I'll expand on this, we like complex passwords. We like password managers to manage your complex passwords, and we like multi-factor authentication. All three of those things are about how you credential and gain access to your systems. So in traditional clinical environments and hospital environments, we still see many systems that are username and password use complex passwords that are unique. Personally, I don't know any of my passwords anymore. I use a password manager that will automatically input my passwords for me, and each password is unique. Supplementing my password manager anytime I have the opportunity to use multi-factor authentication, I do. So any application or service that offers it, I take that option to say, sure, I'll click the approve button, or I'll take the PIN code that gets sent to me. This is really important. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I got really upset at my bank. Canada, we don't have multi-factor authentication for all of our banks. It's wrong. We need better authentication. So today, start with complex passwords, make them unique, and move into multi-factor authentication, and have these same conversations with your IT provider. They have an admin account that gives them access to everything on your network and in your EMR and on your laptops. How do they protect that on your behalf? Do they use password managers? Do they use multi-factor authentication? Those are really important.
Wow, those are great questions. You know, sometimes we get asked about the password managers, Aaron, and their security. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, first off, pick a password manager that is not free. If you are free products, then you're often the product. We've heard that adage. So pick a password manager that you might be paying a little bit of money for that's commercial, and look for ones that are giving you a good understanding of how they're implemented. So the top commercial products, if you do a search like 1Password and LastPass, are generally pretty good. The free products might actually have their own challenges to work with.
Excellent. I know, and we've spoken a little bit about phishing already, and that's rounded out this quick list for reference. And as you all know, the slides will be shared, so you'll have some access to this. You know, fostering a health team that's more likely to avoid that improper access to PHI or accidental disclosure or accidental disposal in an improper way, loss of devices, those types of breaches that happen when a physical record goes in the wrong hands. All of these questions come around to the policies and to the habits and to the training that we all embark on. So thanks very much for that roundup, Aaron. That's terrific. I've got the next slide here we're going to go to really quickly is on reporting. And we're just discussing with Lindsay this morning from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. You know, we do know that we have to notify individuals, privacy commissioners, and regulatory bodies if we have a privacy breach. You know, and there's some documentation if you're looking for more information on that. You know, what does that entail? Which types of breaches have to be reported? Let us know if you're interested in that information in the chat, and we can include that in our circulation. Hopefully, you have policies related to that. Certainly, that's something that we really advocate for with our Shield, is to be well prepared and to be well guided as a team. The other thing is around reporting cyber incidents themselves. It could be an actual breach, one that you don't know is a breach. What we heard from Lindsay this morning, because we had a brief discussion about this, knowing that we were going to be chatting with you today, she said that it's so important to report because it provides new indicators of compromise. They call those IOCs, as if we need another acronym. And they're shared with community to better protect critical infrastructure owners and operators. So the goal is the more information that the think tanks that are managing responses to these breaches have, the better job they can do. And it provides the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity with awareness of changing cyber threats to better tailor their advice and guidance to the clinic sectors, to the hospital sectors. They are not punitive in any way. There's no legal recourse for either reporting or not reporting. It's really sort of a community best practice. So if we could all engage and doing that, even if we don't have a breach that we need to report through the IPC or regulatory bodies, to engage with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. They also have quite a few tools that we can leverage in a breach situation as well and give guidance at that time. And then I'm going to go to the next slide, which you'll get this, and it's got some good links about how to report that fraud. So there's the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, the Cybercrime, local police, and the RCMP. The OPP gave a great presentation 2 weeks ago through the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. I'd encourage you to connect with them as an organization. They share some amazing information, updates, especially for your IT managers, or maybe you don't have an IT manager, but whoever's providing your IT support. It would be really helpful for them to be really in the know of what's happening currently. And they do either bi-weekly or weekly updates, and they'll often send out alerts to something that's new and pressing, just like they did actually yesterday. So now I'm going to get Aaron to walk us through a little bit about the questions that we need to be able to ask those technology vendors we have that come in several categories. And on the slide, I don't know if you can see it now, Aaron, but we've got IT consultants, our EMR providers, and network administrators.
Thank
Aaron,
you.
just before you jump in here, I did have a question. I thought just on one of your last slides about the tips on breaches, it was asked, do you recommend on-site or off-site backup? Which one carries more risks? So I know you touched upon that, but just wondering if you can
I like that question. We had an organization last year that was ransomwared. So that means that they clicked on some malware and they had all of their files encrypted, and they were locked out of them. And we started working with them to say, well, let's see if we can recover. And they did have backups, and the backups were on the same network as their main systems, and the attacker encrypted the backups as well. So the answer to the question is, we do like to see on-site backups, but the on-site backups need to be encrypted by you, not your attacker, before. We also think that backups should be held off-site. So you want to see this ein, zwei, drei. You want to see a kind of a 1, 2, 3 from you or your provider, where you've got multiple versions of backups that are cascading from on-site to off-site. It's much better to be able to say, you know, I can recover from that backup in my vault. Maybe it's 2 weeks old, but it's better than nothing. So off-site backups are important. Now, off-site does not mean that you've put it in your server closet or in the drawer. Off-site might mean that you found another cloud vendor who's totally disconnected, that's holding it off your site and on theirs. So there are technology solutions to deal with there. It's a good question to ask. In terms of the things that we want to ask technology vendors, I'll break this out and say, first off, let's think about this in terms of outsourcing. I'm working on the basis that we here are clinicians and subject matter experts who are not focusing on IT and cyber and risk. And so I think the first things that you want to do when you're looking at a third-party vendor is qualify whether that vendor is well and truly capable to protect your information appropriately. So you want to ask a suite of questions first and foremost about what the vendor's cybersecurity practices are. I gave you a few examples like that. Do you encrypt your data? How do you authenticate into your systems? How are you going to patch and monitor? So one of the things that we will be sending out is kind of a top 10 list of things that you should do. Apply that top 10 list to your vendor, period. Now, the other things that you need to look at when you're talking to a vendor is you really want to understand how and where your data is being stored, whether your data is being encrypted, and whether authorized users can access it without your knowledge. So if you think of your EMR database, you want to ask those questions of your technology provider. If they are a shared service provider, you need to understand that you actually have a new risk. And we're seeing this all the time. We have organizations who say, I went down because my technology provider was hacked. In fact, there were 110 long-term care homes in the United States that were taken offline because their technology provider was hacked, not the long-term care homes. They all used a shared common technology provider. So you absolutely need to put your technology provider through the same question set. How do you store my backups? How are you going to be able to recover? And then you want to move into the security domain. You hold your technology providers to a high standard. So you may ask them questions about whether they have certified their systems. There are third-party security certifications that larger technology providers should be able to do. And lastly, you want them to be able to describe to you their own cybersecurity program. The same way if a clinic, we in our clinic, we have a breach and the college comes in and the privacy commissioner comes in and they say, well, Dr. Bob, show me everything that you do to protect. You want to question your technology provider. You want to say to them, talk to me about your cybersecurity program. Show me all of the steps that you follow. And if a technology provider can't answer those questions, doesn't have the right certifications, or isn't hitting the top 10, then you might have some risk with a technology provider like that. Again, from a follow-up perspective, take a look at the top 10 that we're sharing with you. Hold the technology provider to a higher degree of accountability than a small clinic would. Look for them to communicate their entire program to you and show you that they have certifications. If you hit those key themes in a 30-minute conversation with a technology provider, you've done some very good due diligence.
Well, that's excellent, Aaron. Not sure, Brenda, if there's any questions right now that are remaining in the chat. I'm going to go to our second last slide, which has a summary of some questions that we received between yesterday and today. So maybe I'll do that, and you can hop in if there are some other questions outside of what we have here on the screen. So I'll hand this back over to you, Aaron. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm looking at the questions here. They're good questions too, and some of them I'll try to answer together. But I think the first question is one of the most important. What threats do you need to look out for when working from home? This, of course, is a huge theme for us. And in fact, this week I've been working with Treasury Board, the Canadian Centre for Cyber, and some of the lead security agencies, trying to answer this question about how much more exposed civil servants are when they are working from home. I would say to you that the threat landscape looks quite similar, whether I am a civil servant working at the Department of National Defense or whether I am a clinician that's now working at home. Things have changed for me in material ways. And I'm not talking about the cute things that happen in Zoom where somebody comes up and pats you on the head or the dog or the baby is barking. Those have privacy considerations that need to be looked at, especially in a clinical context. But what I'm talking about is the fact that we have rigorously ripped out the traditional model of working. You come into the office, you connect to my terminal on my systems, on my network with my wires, and I can control it. That's gone. And now you've told our employees, we've said, go and work from home, set yourself up, and bring your own device has happened. So we're all using our home Wi-Fi, our home network. What threats do I need to look out for? Number one is all of the threats that you just inherited because I'm jumping onto a Wi-Fi network where my kids are downloading torrents and my Wi-Fi password hasn't changed for 6 months. That's number one. So the top 10 list now applies to everything on your home network. All of the conversations we had about patching and about updating apply to everything on your home network. And the reason why, folks, is because in security, it's all about the weakest link paradigm. You might have done a great job locking down that laptop that you got from the office. And, you know, this one comes from your technology provider and it's hardened and it's got multi-factor authentication. And then I plug it in at home and I start printing to my home printer and jumping onto my Wi-Fi network. I have a weakest link. If I can get onto your network, I'll get onto the laptop eventually too. So that's number one threat. When you are working from home, you now need to extend your security cordon out a little bit more. And you also need to have a different conversation. If you have a technology provider, you need to start saying to them, how does security work? And I'll give you a keyword, in a zero trust world. Zero trust is the shorthand lingo that cybersecurity people use when we talk about the fact that we've moved out of the traditional moat and castle methodology into this work from home cloud world. It's called zero trust. So how do we build out security in a zero trust world? We've got to extend out our top 10, and we absolutely have to focus on that identity management. If you are still logging into your systems with username and password only, you are not protecting yourself from threats in work from home, and you are way more exposed than you ever were. The second question, how to avoid ransomware. The CCCS, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, is right in raising alarm bells. And I can ground truth that I can say that it's true because I see it from the few hundred clients that we deal with, that ransomware is becoming more prevalent. I would argue that you must assume that ransomware is a possibility, and you must assume that at one point in your future you could be breached, you or a partner or a downstream partner, because we're also connected. The best ways to avoid ransomware are due diligence and awareness training. It's a human behavior function. I was talking to the city of Ottawa a few months ago. As you may know, the City of Ottawa, City of Burlington, Red Deer, these organizations have found themselves subject to ransomware and fraud. And why? It was because the CFO fell victim to very sophisticated targeted spear phishing. So how do you avoid ransomware? Effect training, put behavior practices into place, and focus on the people who have trusted access to systems. If you're in a larger clinic, get the people who have the most access, the best training that you can. They need to be hyper-conscious. The third question is a really good one. How much ransom are attackers asking for currently, and do most pay? Okay, if you talk to Scott over at the Canadian Cyber Center and you say, should I pay ransomware? They'll say no. If you talk to Treasury Board and you say, should I pay ransomware? They will say no. The fact of the matter is that organizations do pay ransomware. Do most pay? We don't know. We do know that there are many circumstances where ransom is paid fully or in part, and we have personally experienced a number of situations. I'll give you two simple examples that apply kind of at the micro level, because the ones that we hear about, right? We hear about the ransomware events that take down a large hospital or a number of clinics. We don't always hear about the little mini ones that take down a small operation. And so I'll give you two stories. The first story is a small organization, less than 20 people, got ransomware, locked out of their system, and they needed to get back in. And so they asked for a third party to help negotiate with their attacker. In this case, they had no cyber insurance. And so they made the decision to pay, and they negotiated a reduced rate. This happens. Hackers, they're playing a 100% margin, right? So any money they get is beneficial. Hackers will negotiate under some circumstances. The other thing that we've seen is partial scenarios where we had a person of interest, for example. This was a few months ago, and we had, a famous person who was actually hacked, and we helped them get part of their cloud stuff back. And then we went to the hacker and said, you know what, this might be a negotiation. Do you take part of that? So there are pays made. We hate it. Don't plan for it. The best thing that you can do is assume that you're going to be breached and understand that you are going to recover from backup. I like to point to Nunavut as an example. You may recall about 9 or 10 months ago, the entire territory of Nunavut was ransomwared, brought offline with the same type of ransomware that takes down hospitals and clinics. And Nunavut said, you know what, we cannot recover from backup. We are not negotiating, and we're recovering from scratch. They are a fantastic case study because they showed us how painful that can be if I don't have a breach response plan and I don't have good recovery. So people are paying, we don't like it. And the most important comment I would make is there's zero guarantee. In fact, we got into a fight with a large organization just a few weeks ago who had a ransomware incident. They cleaned up after it and they said, we don't need to report this as a privacy breach, right? And we said, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because you got the keys back to unlock your data doesn't mean that that attacker didn't steal your data at the same time. No guarantees. You're dealing with criminals. So I would share that comment with you. Your next bullet around how to evaluate an organization's IT security, I'll refer you to the earlier question. The same way that you might evaluate your IT provider is the way that you want to evaluate your own organization's IT security. And there's some checklist type information that we'll be able to send out in the PDFs afterwards. I would also say that the question around how much cyber insurance do I need? I love that that question was asked. In larger organizations, they actually hire firms like Valencia to come in and help them figure out what's appropriate, because cyber insurance is complex and sticky and not always clear. It's not an apples to apples comparison. I can't answer the question how much insurance you need. It's a business question, the same way you determine how much liability insurance you need. But it's important to be aware that you have to understand what insurance does or does not cover. Sometimes insurance covers remediation, sometimes it does not. And also recognize that insurance might need to cover the long tail of, perhaps I dealt with the hacker, but now I might have legal liability. Does my cyber insurance cover that? So I would suggest that there's a good conversation to have with insurance providers and with your colleges around what's appropriate for you. And certainly the CMPA may have some guidance to that effect as well. You have a question in here about whether VPN is the best option. Not always. In fact, come back to my comment about zero trust. If you're working from home and you want to connect back to a traditional system, your old network sitting in the clinic, VPN may be a good option for you if it's well secured. But if you are looking at a modern technology with cloud-based DMRs and cloud-based systems, we do not move to VPN. Instead, we move to strong authentication and identity management with access control. VPN, virtual private networking, is becoming more of a legacy style technology. The last question, what are some of the new security threats? Oh, gosh. Look at folks, in 2017, 2018, we saw a hacker group called the Shadow Brokers break into the NSA's digital arsenal. They pillaged it. They took out of the NSA all of the cybersecurity tools, the weaponized tools that were being used by intelligence agencies to attack other intelligence agencies. I can't make this stuff up. Those are the tools that are being redeployed and used to break into systems today. A lot of the modern ransomware that we are using has its roots in really sophisticated ransomware that was developed by the people who are intending to protect against it. So we already have a problem. We're trying to protect against tools that some of our own agencies developed to protect ourselves from or to do offensive security. We have another problem, which is that more and more sophisticated attacks are coming. So what are some of the new security threats? SIM swapping, identity theft, credential hopping, breaking into cloud services. We will continue to see this cat and mouse game of new threats evolving over time. The trend today tells us that you need to focus on protecting identities rather than technology. And I think that's one good way to say, how do I address new security threats? We need to take an identity-based approach. That was kind of a whirlwind through those questions. I'll pause here and turn it back to you, Leanne, and the team.
Yeah,
for any
no, I just actually, and maybe Bryn, there may be some more questions. I just see one, I'm not sure if you saw it. What are the risks between on-premise versus cloud solutions? And you just mentioned the word cloud, so I thought I'd loop that back in and get your thoughts on that.
On-premise versus cloud solutions. So this morning I was actually talking to John Weigalt, he's the CTO of Microsoft Canada, and we both agreed on something. We both said today a modern cloud implementation has more layers of security than if I built a system on-premise. So if I'm answering the question today, I would say that, you know, a cloud-first approach is becoming better and safer because there are more engineers doing more things to protect the cloud. Now, traditional on-prem is very exposed. Traditional on-prem that has legacy unpatched technology has a lot of exposure and may carry more risk. So I would encourage us to think about two things. Cloud first does make sense. And if you think about on-prem, you need to ask yourself, am I carrying technology debt and creating security debt because I am now holding technology on site? So I'm not an advocate of on-prem implementations for a lot of new technology. And if you have on-prem today, it comes back to making sure that you can control the patching and the monitoring and the management, all of the things that a cloud provider might do for you elsewhere.
Well, Aaron, you've given us such an amount of food for thought, and really appreciate having your lens on this topic today. We do know that, as it says on the slide here, that a well-prepared and trained line of human defense is critical to prevent against privacy and cybersecurity breaches. And that well-prepared and trained line of human defense really comes down to knowledge and habits. Bryn, I'm not sure, are there any other questions right now around that have come in from people attending?
No extra questions. I think we got through them all. So well done to both of you. I think that was extremely helpful. I know I get these questions quite often. I think it's becoming more and more relevant, obviously, as we have transitioned to home and offering a lot more care virtually. So I think the timing of this, it couldn't be better. That being said, I also know it's a very busy time, so it's also prioritizing this, but I certainly think highlighted quite a few tips and tricks for people to really be aware of. I know we get the question on cyber insurance. I've gotten it a handful of times, even the past week or two, and it's a difficult one. My first thing is check with your current insurance providers. If they are providing insurance to healthcare providers, you might already have it. Talk to your colleagues as well as peers, because it really does depend on your history and your revenue and your size and all of that. So, but thank you so much to Erin and Leanne for joining us today. I'm going to remind everyone that we did record today's session. I know it's a really busy time and not everybody is able to participate in all our lunch and learn sessions that we've been hosting. So we will have that recording available. Erin and Leanne are kindly going to be sharing the slides with us as well. So we'll get those posted because this is an important topic, I think, for all team members. It's, you know, it's one thing if just the ED or your IT manager is aware, but really we do need to make sure that our whole teams are really understanding cybersecurity risks and threats and how to prepare and respond to them. We have one question coming in.
I just saw that, yeah, from Bryce.
Yeah, from Bryce. Any comments on the latest news regarding hackers exploiting Microsoft Exchange server and how to deal with something like this that's out of our control? Good question, Bryce.
Yeah, it is. This is the extension of what's going on with the SolarWinds breach that we heard about going back a few months ago. I think the answer to your question is we are still nowhere near the end of this story. And this is the tip of the iceberg. The depth and the breadth of this particular breach, from SolarWinds to Exchange to third parties, is massive. And so I think what we're going to find is that this is one of the largest breaches of personal information and corporate systems in the past decade. Keep your eye on the ball with this one. It's going to be complicated. What does it mean for us? Okay, it means that some of us are going to start thinking more about how we take control of the keys for encryption. It means that we were going to say that zero trust model extends all the way out to our cloud providers, because if I cannot trust Microsoft, a security first country or company, how do I build things out? So this will change how we build and secure solutions over time to ensure that control of the data remains with the data owner. But we haven't seen the end of this story. It's going to be fascinating and damaging.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, well, yeah, it's going to be evolving, that's for sure. We'll have to have you guys back maybe in some time to sort of see where we're at and what changes have resulted going forward in the future. I'll just, if anyone has any outstanding questions after we digest all the information that was shared with us today, you can submit them to either myself or Sandeep and Afto, and we can always get back in touch with Erin and Leanne. Again, they're going to share some tools and resources with us afterwards that will get posted to our website and sent out to everyone who registered today as well. So 12:59, we've got about 30 seconds to spare. So I'll just say one final thank you to Erin and Leanne, and thanks to everyone today for taking the time to join in this very important topic. Hope everyone has a great afternoon and able to enjoy that sunshine that's coming through my window. So take care, everyone, and thanks so much to Erin and Leanne.
All right, thanks all. Stay safe.